Welcome to another podcast of Wind, Waves and Wells with Joe. This one is really probably going to make you think a little bit more about life. This is a story that's pretty well known throughout the North Sea, especially from the support vessel side of things. Chris Lemons, the diver that got left behind, or as as it's known in the film world now as Last Breath. His story will probably really transject, we say, with the actors like Woody Harrelson and Finn Cole playing in the film that's about him. It's not his film, obviously, as you'll find out. But his story is pretty impressive, pretty unbelievable, and I'm not going to ramble on too much because it is quite a long podcast. But one, I'm pretty sure you will take a huge admiration from what some of the men and women are doing and getting up to offshore. So without further ado, straight into it with Chris Lemons. Hi Chris, how are you?
Hello Joe, yeah, very good, thank you. How are you?
Yeah, I'm good, thank you. First things first, thank you so much for coming on. I know you're a busy man at the moment with your movie star life,
Yeah.
and I'm really delighted that you've been able to have a bit of spare time for myself. How's
It's a
things?
pleasure. Thanks for having me. Yeah, all very good, thank you. Yes, just as you say, just back from New York, so it's been a bit of a whirlwind, a surreal whirlwind, as you can imagine.
Hanging out with Woody Harrelson.
As you do, yeah, into the early hours of the morning, as it turns out. Yeah, but it was good, a real, I hope once in a lifetime experience. Yeah, we don't really want to do all this again. Yeah.
No, I can't imagine you want a Last Breath Part 2. But obviously we are going to end up going in that. But obviously there was a Chris before the whole scenario. Did you jump straight into diving, or how did you get into what you were doing?
I fell into it really. I always wish I had a bit of a better story for this. Dave and Duncan, from the documentary, they both were sort of passionate divers before they became divers. Duncan was grew up watching Jacques Cousteau and the love of the water and all that kind of thing, and Dave was a sort of scuba diver instructor over in Thailand, I think. And they both sort of found a way to make their passion their vocation, I guess. But for me, that wasn't really the case. I was in my early 20s, a bit lost in life, to be truthful. Didn't really know what direction I was going to take or what to do. And I had a friend whose sort of father, as it always is in the offshore world, as you know, a friend's father got me a job, just a summer job really, on the back deck of a DSV. We were working for Technip at the time, and about to go with DSV, just for a bit of pocket money really. And that gave me the chance to see the divers at work. It was a world, like a lot of people, I guess, a world I didn't really know very much about, or even barely knew existed really. And at the time, and I've learned a lot better since, it seemed glamorous, and it seemed interesting and different, and like it could be fun really. And I think they probably turned up on the quayside in slightly better cars than I had as well, so that all helped. But yeah, I've learned better since, that it's definitely not glamorous, but that was a real big moment for me in my life. It gave me sort of purpose, and I thought, well, that's what I'd like to do. And I think life's a lot easier, especially when you're young, when you know where you want to go and what you want to do. So yeah, that was it really. So yeah, I just followed the path from there, and I worked as a rigger basically on the back deck of the boat for quite a while, and then I went off and did my air diving course eventually, and came back and sort of air dive for a few years, jobbing all around the world, as you have to when you're an air diver. It's a bit more of a hand to mouth existence, sort of searching for the next job and that kind of thing, and you apply your trade wherever they'll have you, and do that for a few years until I took my sat diving course down in Marseille eventually, and that was that really. Yeah.
So, because obviously quite a lot of people probably won't have a clue what sat diving is, do you want to just run through what it involves with regards to going offshore and doing it?
Yeah. Well, it's a strange world, isn't it? I mean, the diving's the easy bit, really. The weird bit is the living circumstances, I guess, because, I mean, in a nutshell, saturation diving really is just a method of diving very deep. There are different problems with diving deep if you're just breathing air, for example, scuba diving. There are three, really. The first is nitrogen narcosis. So the nitrogen in the air that we breathe becomes quite toxic as you get deeper. So the longer you're down there and the deeper you go, it sort of has a sort of almost a drunken effect on the body, really impairs decision making. So you can't sustain that. The second one is the oxygen in the mixture. So if you breathe oxygen under pressure for a long time, you can start to fit and convulse from oxygen poisoning. So it just doesn't work basically beyond. As an air diver, you're restricted to 50 meters. And if you dive to 50 meters breathing air, you can't stay down there very long either, because the other big problem is obviously decompression. So as I'm sure you know, when you go scuba diving, you don't just come straight to the surface. You have to slowly come back up to the surface, taking stops to allow the inert gases in your system or in the tissues to basically pass safely back out. Because if you were to ascend very quickly, those gases would expand quicker than they can get out of your tissues. They'd rupture tissues, they'd block arteries and veins and things like that, and eventually arrest the flow of oxygen to the brain. So obviously you can't have any of that. But if you're diving to 30 meters for 30 minutes, you might stop for 10 minutes on the way back up, 10 minutes of decompression stops. But when you're working in the North Sea, for example, you might be diving to 100 meters or 300 feet. And if we work down there for about 6 hours at a time on the seabed, and your tissues become saturated. So that's why they call it saturated. They get to the point where they can take no more of that inert gas. And the equivalent decompression stops to come back up to the surface from 100 meters, having been down there that long, take about 4 days. So you obviously can't spend 4 days coming back to the surface. And, our oil company Paymaster's not going to have people hang around on ropes for 4 days and people get hungry and tired. So obviously that can't happen. So the solution really is sat diving. So the first thing is we change the gas that we breathe. So instead of breathing air, we breathe heliox. So it's a mixture of helium and oxygen, gives you this ridiculous squeaky Donald Duck voice that you have the whole time you're in there, with a novelty of where that wears off very, very fast, I can assure you. But also we reduce the amount of oxygen. So if you're diving to 100 meters, you'd breathe as little as 6% oxygen, which if you and I were to breathe that in the room now, we'd be rendered unconscious pretty quickly through hypoxia. But because of the miracle of pressure and partial pressure on the body, really, that's the equivalent of breathing nearly 5 times as much oxygen as we're breathing now. So it's kind of a simple solution, really. But the main problem is the decompression. So to circumnavigate that, I suppose, what you end up doing is spending a month doing one dive. So that's facilitated by a series of chambers. So decompression chambers, which are basically metal tin cans, tubes on the boat. Or it doesn't have to be on a boat, can be on a barge, can be on a rig, can be anywhere, but you need it really. And as a team, you go in. On a typical diving support vessel, there'd be 4 teams of 3, each team of 3 to cover 6 hours on a seabed. So we work 24 hours a day. But as a team, you go into those chambers, you shut the door, and they're pressurized down. So we pump in that helium oxygen gas to pressurize the whole system down to an equivalent working depth. So if you're going to be diving at 100 meters, you might pressurize the system down to 90 meters, for example. And that takes about maybe an hour and a half or something like that, just to do that in a nice controlled fashion. And then really what happens is you live under those circumstances. So you eat, you sleep, you shower, you watch your iPad or whatever you do, read a book in those circumstances for day after day. And every day a diving bell locks onto the top of that chamber system. And as a team of 3, you climb up into the bell. You seal off you close the door and you seal it off. So you remove the pressure between the bell and the system. And the bell can then be lifted, trolleyed, and dropped down through usually a moon pool, so just a hole in the bottom of the vessel, down to that equivalent working depth. So it's lowered down on a wire to 90 meters in this example. But when you get there, because you've got an equivalence of pressure in the bell and outside, when you open the door, the water doesn't come in. So you've got a dry environment, basically, because the gas pressure is pushing the water back out. And at that point, you don your diving helmet and you get into the water. The 2 of us get in the water every day. One always stays in the bell just to tend the umbilicals and manage the gases and things like that. And then you sort of dive, if you like. You drop the last 10 meters down to the seabed. You work for 6 hours. You come back. You get back in the diving bell, close the door, and that diving bell was lifted back up to the vessel, and then locked back onto the system. And you drop down. You have your meal. You have a shower. You go to sleep, and then you repeat the next day. And that just means basically for 23 days in this example, you would dive every day. And then after 23 days, you stop diving and basically lie in your bunk with a book and very, very slowly decompress. So that gas is basically bled out of the system about 1 meter an hour, which is what it takes about 4 days. And eventually, when you get back to zero pressure, and the door will pop open, and out you get, and that's it really. And what you're basically doing then is just one very long dive. You're only decompressing once in a sort of control fashion at the end. So yeah, sorry, I've gone on a bit there, but
No, that's perfect, because to be honest with you, there probably is a lot of unknowns around diving, but just from my own experience, you also eat a hell of a lot when you're down there, don't you? Calories wise, you burn a hell of a lot more calories due to what's the crap basically is being pumped around you.
That's got nothing to do with the gas. It was just the you eat a bit. I suppose you eat a bit more just because you're working hard every day. But I mean, I would say that's offshore in general. If you're grafting, it depends. I mean, you can absolutely have trips with terrible weather where people might only get in the water 3 times over 28 days.
Yeah.
And they're not they might be eating chocolate, but it's not good for them. Yeah, so
Right. No, I
yeah,
even noticed maybe it's the myth. Then I believe that you burn off a lot more calories when you are under pressure. I always just assumed that was the case. That and the
ah.
fact that the dive techs were always in the flipping galley whenever we were in.
Yeah, no, that's a complete myth, and you've definitely been lied to there. Yeah, just being greedy. Yeah.
Yeah. The process for it. Do you want to just run through it quickly, because it's not a 5 minute. It's not like taking your Bosey or anything like that, is it? To go into the training to get into saturation diving, it does take a bit of time, doesn't it?
Yeah, sort of. I mean, I wouldn't say it's a life's work, but it's definitely a vocation that takes a long time. The actual training, to actually become an air diver first of all, takes I think it's about a 14-week course or something like that. I couldn't even tell you anymore, but something like that. It's quite an expensive thing to do as well, like all offshore courses are, aren't they? For some reason, they like adding a zero on the end. But yeah, I'd say the diving one's particularly bad. Maybe for good reason, but yeah, it's a job that you tend to learn on the job, if you like. When you train as a diver, you train to dive really, and a lot of it's focused on rescues and emergency situations and things like that. In terms of the practicalities of learning the tools of the trade, because as I always said, diving's not really that hard. Anybody you can just stick a hat on and go. I could get you underwater in 10 minutes, not without too much of a problem. It's not difficult to breathe underwater. The skill really involves being efficient and functional when you're down there. So that's you tend to learn that on the job, and that's why you can't really go into saturation diving straight away. You become an air diver, you sort of ply your trade, as I said, around the world, and you learn the mechanics of diving, I guess, on the job, but also all of the skills that you need to be able to function and work efficiently underwater. Everything's that little bit harder. You learn a lot of, we used to call ourselves riggers. Before I became a diver, you were a rigger on the back deck, but you're not really doing much rigging. The rigging actually takes place under the water, to move any load or anything like that. All jobs you would do on the surface, and just become that bit harder. So you learn the skills of that, of being efficient in the water, of navigating underwater in the darkness and working in zero visibility and things like that. So that takes a few years definitely to be good, and some people just will never go beyond there. And then to become the actual sat diving course is only 3 weeks, really. It's quite a quick process to learn the mechanics of the diving bell and the chamber system. And then you practice rescuing. So the actual tools of the trade, if you like, you learn on the job, like a lot of things offshore, isn't it? But mostly when you're training as a diver, you're learning how to work the hats, function the hats, maintain things and that sort of stuff,
So prior to obviously the incident in 2012, how many years had you been diving for? Sats and air.
Yeah. I was pretty new to sat diving. I think I've been doing it about a year and a half. The documentary and the movie make a big deal of me being the new boy. That we all got given a bit of a typecaster role to some extent.
Yeah.
Duncan plays dad, which was true. Dave gets edited horrendously. I think he gets painted as a bit of a psychopath. Really.
That's actually, I'm going to stop you 2 seconds there, because
I always have to defend Dave. Yeah.
I know, because I watched it again, like I said to you just before we went on. And the first time I watched it in 2019, I thought Dave, he's portrayed as a bit of a dick, isn't he? When you look at it. But then I watched it again a few weeks back, and he's probably the exact kind of person you want in the situation that you ended up in, because he's actually like, and I'm just comparing it to my own kind of experience offshore, is sometimes you want people that are just job obsessed. They're there to do the job. They're so well driven, almost Spock-like. And then he's like a totally different character outside, I'm sure, with his family and stuff like that. But he's not actually a dick. He's just incredibly driven to do his job, isn't he? I mean, like as you say, the way Dave was portrayed, he's a bit more like dickish. But if you actually rewatch it all, I thought he was actually like he's probably the best kind of person that was in there.
Yeah, both things you say are very true. Yeah, first of all, yeah, he isn't a dick in any way. He's a very nice, easygoing guy. He's very professional and sort of dedicated, but it is not at all, I don't think anyway, how he's portrayed in the film. You know, there's lines, for example, because there was a precursor to the documentary that you can find it on YouTube. It's called Lifeline, which is kind of how the whole thing started off. They made a bit of an in-house version of it, you know. And Dave says things like, you know, I didn't want to treat Chris like going to fetch my friend and my colleague. I wanted to treat him like an inanimate object just because it made it easier, you know. And of course, documentary makers and filmmakers, they cut that down to being, you know, he's just an inanimate object and that kind of thing. And I'm paraphrasing, but generally speaking, that's how it's edited. You know, it makes him sound far worse than he is. But it also, exactly as you say, depends how you watch it. Because some people watch that and can be pretty derogatory about him, which is astonishingly unfair. Because, you know, the bottom line is I don't do anything in this story apart from lie there, you know. And Duncan and Dave are the heroes here, and Craig and everybody on board really. And it's totally unfair for them to get criticised in any way, particularly as it's just not true. But yeah, what you also say is very true. What you couldn't have had anybody better in the water that day. I mean, I know we'll come on to that, but to have a cool head, somebody who was pragmatic, who was able to some extent to disassociate himself from what must have been enormous pressure and tension, and affect a really, you know, incredible rescue. Extremely fit guy as well, you know, which not all divers are, trust me. You know, you know, you've probably witnessed a bit of that.
Oh, I've
There's
seen
you wonder how some manage, but yeah, he's not. He is very, very fit guy, and yeah, I'll tell you right now, there's a lot of people wouldn't have got me back that day, and for all sorts of reasons, you know, psychological, panicking, physical reasons, you know. So yeah, as you say, he's an absolutely lovely guy. He is different off the boat, but he's also not as he's portrayed in that documentary. And
Yeah, I think it's definitely something you need to watch again. I think if you watch it once, watch it again, and like I say, like I watched it the second time. I actually messaged my missus straight after it and said, you know what, he was the perfect person for the job, and we'll actually go into it now. So, what was the job that day that you were going down to do?
It was pretty. You'll say it was a pretty standard day at the office that day. There was we were working inside a manifold, so a drilling template on the seabed. We were 91 meters down, I think. It was a place called the Huntingdon Manifold, which is about 90 miles east of, pretty much due east of Aberdeen. And we were just removing a section of pipework basically, or we were preparing to do that at the time. One of the biggest dangers to divers is differential pressure. So that's when you've got a different pressure inside the pipework that you do with the ambient water, because it will suck you in, you know. So I think we had a pressure testing hose down from the back deck of the Topaz, running into the manifold, and we were basically creating barriers, you know, which anybody who works on a rig will be familiar with as well. You know that, you know, you need to create the double block and bleed, we call it, the two barriers either side of the section. So isolating that section, making sure there was, you know, we're happy with the pressure inside, what we think the pressure is what the pressure is inside, prior to taking that section out. So just the kind of thing we would do every day really. And you know, and so there was no, you know, it's nothing to do with the work scope. There's no suggestion that anything was going to go wrong. The visibility was actually pretty good that night. It's usually pretty awful, but that night it was quite clear. We could see the diving bell pretty much from where we were working, which is unusual. And even the manifold itself, a lot of those structures down there that were put down in the 70s are not really diver friendly. They're, you know, access and egress is pretty difficult. And but again, that day was pretty open. You know, it was a nice, big, easy structure. You know, we've said since, if it happened a couple of days before, we were, you know, right in amongst some small bore pipe work. You know, I don't think we'd have made it out, to be honest with you. You know.
So, talk us through from the bell. You went out, you start the work, and then, you know, obviously I'm sure you've told the story a few hundred times now, but how did it go?
Yeah, we'd been down there maybe an hour, I think, something along the lines of an hour. Dave and myself were working inside. This thing was about 20 meters long, maybe 10 meters high, the structure, and we were pretty much halfway into it, so maybe 10 meters in, if you like. pottering away. I think Dave was working maybe 2 or 3 meters away. I think he was taking a flange. He was in the process of taking a flange off. You see that in the documentary briefly when it all happened. But yeah, the first indication we had that something was going wrong was a lot. We heard the alarms. We've got an open line of communication in our helmet. Yeah, to a dive supervisor. So that was Craig Frederick that day. And though, to be honest, that wasn't panic inducing in itself. We hear alarms all the time. You can hear the dive supervisor, you can hear everyone up in dive control on the boat. And usually, I'm not sure if we're swearing on this podcast, Joe, but
no, you can swear away. It's fine. There's no point.
Well,
plastering over how we speak offshore. There's absolutely none.
No point glossing it over.
No,
yeah,
no
exactly.
This one.
Well, they were giving their divers they usually giving divers a bit of a slate and saying how much better they did it in their day, that kind of thing. But we also hear alarms all the time. We hear O2 alarms, carbon dioxide alarms. We've got 2 diving bells on the topaz. So, when they're about to launch the other one, they're testing the dynamic positioning alarms, which we could maybe talk about what that is in a second. But so we hear them all the time. So when we heard the alarms go off, I think maybe our ears pricked up just because they're maybe a bit louder than normal, but it wasn't really panic inducing because you hear it all the time. But then quite quickly, Craig said to us, in no uncertain terms, you need to get yourself out of the structure, get yourself back to the diving bell. I don't think he particularly explained what was going on, but you could just tell from his tone of voice that, it wasn't a drill. It was something relatively serious. But yeah, I don't think we panicked. We put our tools down, hung them up really, and did what he said, made a fairly orderly exit from that structure. We preach umbilical management all the time is king in diving, because that umbilical that we have that connects us to the diving bell and connects the diving bell to the ship is exactly what it sounds like. It's just a giver of life, really. It provides us with an infinite supply of breathing gas, basically, hot water to keep us warm in what are obviously very, very cold conditions, power for a light and a camera on your helmet and things like that. So whatever we do, wherever we move, you're always making sure that that's not caught on anything, which will sound ironic in a second, obviously. But yeah, as we were leaving the structure, you sort of hold that in your left hand to make sure it doesn't catch on the myriad of, the myriad of pipework and valves and whatever else is in there that you can catch it on. But as I said, it was quite an open structure that day. So getting out of the structure wasn't an issue. Maybe within 30 seconds, I suspect we were outside of the structure and out into open seabed in the clear, really, where you would where you would worry less about your umbilical, I suppose. And that's when the confusion started, I guess, because when we looked up, fully expecting to see the diving bell sort of in front of us, where we'd left it, really, with our umbilicals running straight back to it, and it wasn't there. But again, you don't think about things too much in those situations as a diver. I mean, just to go back to the mechanics of diving, if you're scuba diving and you've got some kind of an emergency, you've always got the option of going to the surface. It's never a very good idea. You might get the bends or decompression sickness, but that can be rectified sometimes. But anyway, it's always an option if you run out of gas, for example. Not as a sat diver, though, because your tissues are saturated. If you were to go to the surface, you'd die pretty much instantly from explosive decompression. So it's not something you ever consider. There is only one safe haven in that or any other situation, and that is the diving bell. And it's easy to find, although I supervise these days, and you find a lot of divers who still ask you where it is, But it's at the end of your umbilical. If you're watching, boys, it's at the end of your umbilical,
I heard that a couple of times. I have it's the bell. Follow your umbilical, mate.
Yeah. Well, I try not to respond on the comms because it just embarrasses them, But sometimes they leave you with no choice, Yeah. It doesn't matter what the visibility is like; it's still going to be there, yeah. So it's but yeah, in that situation, that was it. But when we came out, Dave and I found that our umbilicals had wrapped back over the top of the structure we were working within. So we just turned really to follow those umbilicals, to explain really what was happening above the ship, because we can't drop anchors when we're working. It's too deep, or almost more to the point, we have to move the boat around a lot. And there's also a lot of sensitive infrastructure, as I'm sure you know, on the seabed. You don't want to drop an anchor on it. So we use a DP system for diving, which is a computer really, which has a bunch of references. We put beacons on the seabed. We use GPS, taut wires, which are sort of weighted wires, and the angle of inclination is fed back to the computer. And wind and wave sensors, things like that, and all that information is collated by the computer, and it instructs the various thrusters, propellers around the boat to counteract the effect of the wind and the waves and the tides, and it's able to hold, means the boat is able to hold position in to a remarkable degree of accuracy, really, to within a meter or two most of the time, in all but the very worst of weather, really. So it's a brilliant system, when it works. And they basically suffered, I mean, I won't bother going into too much detail, but they basically suffered a catastrophic single point failure of this system, which is never supposed to happen. All systems on a dive boat was a DP class 2 vessel, which means that, should be double redundancy basically for any life support system, including that. But anyway, it had suffered a single point failure, and they basically lost all control of the vessel. All the screens on the bridge blacked out, and we were very suddenly at the mercy of the wind and the waves, and the boat had just started to drift away, really. And what it had done, had drifted straight back over our heads, and over the top of the structure, and was continuing to move away. Our umbilicals are only 50 meters long, so it starts to obviously pull your umbilical with it as the bell, which is underneath the boat, is getting dragged away. We turn to climb those umbilicals. That's a job that you kind of have to do hand over hand, because you're weighted. People might, I don't get asked very often, really, but it does come up online sometimes. You get a couple of naysayers saying, suggesting that I could have done something about, or they call it an umbilical management incident, which is definitely open to debate. I've had to ask myself ever since, really, could I have done anything differently? But the truth is, the documentary definitely belies, because the footage is looped, just how quickly it happened. But basically, as I climb hand over hand, I get to the top, and I've left a loop behind me of umbilical, because it's attached into my. I'm wearing a harness, and it's attached into my waist by a carabiner. So, I turned straight away to try and make sure it didn't catch on anything. I don't think I could have done anything as I climbed. You can gather your umbilical as you're walking, but when you're climbing, you just can't, because you need both hands to climb. I don't know.
But you're also climbing in a bit of an emergency way as well, aren't you? Because ultimately you've been told this is going on. So I mean, it's not the first thing that comes. Obviously umbilical management will come to head, but you're also in a state of, well, I've got to get the fuck out of here kind of thing as well, though, aren't you?
Yeah, very much so. And also, you don't know, you haven't got a reference. You don't know I don't know where the bell is. I don't know, I don't remember noticing this transponder bucket that got caught on as I climbed, but I wouldn't have necessarily known which side to go with that to get it right. Dave happened to go the other side of it just because of where he was climbing. We'd have to ask him, but I don't know that it was anywhere. We have no idea where the bell was. So you really can only follow your umbilical. So I don't know. It's something to debate. I tell you right now, people always ask, we'll maybe talk about going back, but we went back to work quite quickly afterwards, because we didn't feel we'd suffered any trauma. But I tell you right now, if I felt I was culpable, I think I would have struggled to go back if I felt like I'd let everybody down by fucking up, basically.
Yeah, they do. Yeah, but yeah, I think also, though, that's the age-old keyboard warrior as well now, able to say, it's very easy to stand from a distance and say this, that, and the other in hindsight. But I think when push comes to shove, it's at the end of the day, you're in a situation that's not supposed to happen, because ultimately dynamic positioning does not fail, until obviously this day. So I think it's very easy to kind of turn around and people to kind of point pictures. So you're trying to get back to the bell.
Yeah, so we're getting back. So I get to the top. Duncan and the bell is able to come up on the slack of the divers. As we're coming back, you can only do one at a time. He chose to do Dave's. You'd have to ask him why. But yeah, as I get to the top, there's this little. Yeah, exactly. We got to the top. There was a bit of a loop, and yeah, I turned to try and make sure it didn't catch, but it was so fast. Even literally as I turned, I could see it was folding under this inch-wide gap, basically under this transponder bucket, which shouldn't have been there, as it turns out. But that's another story. And it's. I realised immediately I was in serious trouble, really. What you've become, or what I'd become at that point, very quickly, was an anchor to an 8,000-ton vessel. So obviously there's only ever going to be one winner in that situation. But ironically, that to begin with, my main worry wasn't. I didn't really consider the umbilical snapping. This all happened very quickly, obviously. But at the beginning, as the boat pulled away and the umbilical's being pulled, it was actually edging round this tiny gap. So I was being pulled down into the top of the structure. So my first thought, my legs were sort of splaying uncontrollably, and I thought, my legs are going to break here, and my pelvis is going to go. This is going to be horrendous. And then secondly, my umbilical was being fed through an inch wide gap, and I thought, well, if this keeps going, I'm going through there as well, and that's going to be like being pulled through a cheese grater, and that's not going to be a great way to go either.
It's not.
So thankfully, it sounds silly, but we had this enormous dose of bad luck really with the DP system failing. But after that, I had a lot of very good luck, and the first really big bit of good luck was that it did jam, because if it had kept going, I wouldn't have made it out. I'm certain of that. But it sort of held tight really. And that meant, though, that the umbilical then, as the boat moves away, begins to stretch as the weight of the vessel comes onto it, really. It stretched to the point, you see that in the documentary, that Duncan couldn't feed me any more slack. It's sort of wound round a rack in the bell, and that whole stainless steel rack started to bend off the wall in the diving bell. He was in no small amount of danger himself. But for me on the bottom, the sort of first thing before it went completely, I think initially obviously I'm shouting, give me some slack.
Yeah.
And they're just saying to me, get yourself back to the bell, get yourself back to the bell. A lot of the audio you hear actually in the documentary, a lot of the footage is real, but some of the audio we had to recreate, so there's a bit of artistic license in some of that. I had to breathe helium down in a studio and start giving it,
because let's be honest,
exactly.
it's probably not actually going to hear very well what you guys are saying to each other.
Yeah,
it's a bit of I mean, dive supers can obviously understand you, but
yeah,
the public are not going to have a clue what's really going on, are they? Really?
Yeah. People have moaned about that in the movie, that's not the real thing because they, they're not breathing helium. Well, I guarantee you wouldn't understand a single. It's not like breathing out of a balloon. Your vocal cords are constricted as well. If you've ever heard it, it's absolutely unintelligible.
It's quite funny as well. Like like you say, it winds off just from going on DSVs himself, and you can't understand the fucking word they say. You can't. I mean, dive supers are really they give them their due. I mean, obviously you're one now. They understand them word for word almost near enough. But like if you're sat well, okay, that's good. That's
Pretend
good again. I'm picking you up again. I'm doing a net.
Yeah, thanks, mate. Yeah.
But we've sat in dirty messes, and obviously the diving's on the wall and the sound and stuff, and you really don't have a clue what they're saying half the time. You really don't.
Yeah, no, I mean, especially when you get deep. I mean, when you're in shallow, it's okay, but yeah, when you're deep and people are breathing hard, it's you get tuned in, as you say, eventually over the years. But even then, you're only sort of picking certain words sometimes. So yeah, it's very difficult. Anyway, definitely wouldn't make for a movie. Put it that way.
No, I think you.
Yeah,
especially I can't imagine it. And obviously the Woody Harrelson wouldn't sound like Woody Harrelson at all. It'd be useless, would it?
Yeah, I was kind of disappointed he didn't try the Chesterfield accent as well. But
it's very Americanized.
Coward, yeah. Fair enough.
So
so it gets caught, and we have I was saying about talking, so I'm asking for everything to be given slack, but then very abruptly, I think the communications cable or the power cable must have got severed inside or pulled out, and almost like a jack being pulled out of the back of a speaker. I suddenly couldn't hear anything, and they couldn't hear me, which puts you in quite a lonely place quite quickly, as you can probably imagine. And then very quickly after that, I think the gas hose must have stretched to the point that it became kinked, and quite abruptly, really, I didn't have anything to breathe, which is obviously never a good thing. But I guess that's when the sort of the countdown clock started, because we carry these emergency supplies on our back. We have an infinite supply of gas, as I said, from the boat, enough to keep you down there for months, really, if it was just you. But on our back, we carry 2 scuba bottles, really, which we never really expect to have to use. But you have a knob on the side of your helmet, which, trust me, when you have nothing to breathe, you open that pretty quickly, and that opens the supply from these emergency tanks. Obviously that puts you in a very different place, a world where you've got this infinite supply to this world where you very much have a finite supply, The documentary makes a big deal of 5 minutes. The reality is probably more like 8 or 9 minutes, we'll never know exactly, as I said, but to beforehand. But So I turned that on, and then we had this little moment with Dave had obviously realised there was a problem. He turns to try and get back to me. In the movie, he says, "You must stay here," and we couldn't speak to each other in real life.
No.
My communication cable might have been severed, so I couldn't say anything to him at all. But yeah, we definitely had a bit of a movie style moment. He only managed to get to within a couple of meters of me. His umbilical was pulling him away. But we had a bit of an eye-to-eye moment where I'm sort of entreating him to give me a hand, and he's looking at me basically saying, "I'm sorry, pal, you're on your own here." And then he was dragged away into the darkness, and I lost sight of him, but I could still see his light. And then I remember seeing his light sort of be pulled away, and then I lost sight of that as he was dragged off the top of the structure. And again, he himself in significant danger, being dragged by this vessel in an uncontrolled fashion, loads of other structures down there. And, he had to pull himself back along his umbilical in what he describes as a very, very fast flowing river. So he was exhausted, he tells me, when he got back to the bell himself. But as he's going back, the weight really starts to come onto my umbilical. And eventually, as I said, there's only going to be one winner in it, and it does snap. I don't really remember that happening particularly, but Dave describes it as a shotgun going off, really, a really loud, violent sound.
So could he hear that then? Could he hear it snapping?
I think everyone on the boat heard it.
Really?
Certainly those in the chambers did. Yeah, I think it was pretty loud. I mean, it's a significant bit of kit.
That's what I was thinking.
2 inches. You've got a big, because nobody wants it to snap. You've got 4 or 5 hoses going through it. You've got a big security rope through the middle of it as well, braided rope. Steel rope. Sorry, just to strengthen it as well. So it takes a bit of breaking. So pretty loud noise, but I don't remember that. I mean, I probably did hear it, but I don't have any recollection of that at all. Yeah.
And are you on the ladder at this point? Are you still climbing up the structure? Sorry, at this point when it goes, yeah.
There's no ladder. No, I'm kind of at that point. I'm trapped, pulled onto there's a big sort of tubular at the top of the structure, so I'm sort of being pulled into that. And when the tension comes off, so when the umbilical breaks, I actually fall backwards at that point. So the tension's relieved, so I fall the 10 meters back from the top of the structure to the seabed, pretty gently, because we're in water, obviously. So you float it down is probably more accurate, but we're pretty heavily weighted. So I came to an abrupt halt on my back, I remember. And even then, I don't think I was really considering what was going on. You're very much in fight or flight mode at that moment, and just thinking, must get back to the diving bell. And but I do remember having a bit of a pause of disbelief, thinking, what on earth is happening here?
Why the fuck did I do this?
This is bad. This is bad.
This is a shit job.
Yeah. Oh god. Well, yeah. Why didn't I work harder at school? Yeah.
Take you back to the air diving.
Yeah. Exactly. But it was very dark as well. That was the other thing.
That's because
the movie does it.
That's it, isn't it? I mean, you're watching Netflix, and I'm sure in the movie there's got to be a bit of light. But was it pitch black? I mean, was it totally pitch black?
Yeah, I mean, it's very little ambient light penetrates to that depth.
Yeah.
But I never really noticed it as much as that, because usually you might get a bit of ambient light off the bell or off everyone else's hat cameras and stuff. But yeah, it was to black to the point I put my hand in front of my helmet. You couldn't even see the shadow of your hand in the I just couldn't see it. Yeah, complete and utter darkness and blackness, which is very disorientating, obviously. And it's easy, as you probably know, it's easy to get lost down there at the best of times. People are always taking a piss out of divers getting lost. It was a pretty easy thing to do, really, if you have got an unhelpful dive supervisor. We're in with a compass and a light and a map almost. You can still make a fool of yourself if you're not careful. So it's disorientating. Yeah. So yeah, in the movie it's even better when they carries a flare.
Yeah, there's definitely no flare down there, is there?
Yeah, that's gonna grate with a few people.
There's gonna be a lot of North Sea tigers that are not gonna appreciate that.
Oh no. Yeah, and in fact, at the beginning of the job, which actually is a great idea, we don't but they lower a sort of power cable down from the ship and they plug it into the manifold, and the whole manifold lights up. And how good would that be? And maybe we should follow Hollywood, Anyway, I didn't have any of that. It was absolute pitch darkness, and I sort of got myself up to my feet in an ungainly fashion, and realized, even though that structure, which is an enormous bright yellow thing, was probably only 2 or 3 meters from me, I had no idea where it was, could not see it at all. So pretty much like going to the toilet in the middle of the night, I sort of put my hands out in front of me and set off in a direction in hope more than expectation. And, there'll be, massive, 270 degrees I could have taken that I wouldn't have hit it at least. And I was, again, very, very lucky. Just took a couple of steps and bumped into what I assumed was it. It was so dark I still couldn't tell what it was, but I could feel the metal. And tried to find a way to climb it. I edged along. I remember being very frightened that I would lose it. It would have been very, very easily to walk out into no man's land, which would have rendered finding me much harder, and also rescuing me much more difficult, because I would have been lower, which I'll explain a bit. But yeah, I was scared of losing it, so I sort of kept one hand on it and edged it along, and I had a hand in front of me like this, worried I was going to bang my head into something, trying to find a way to climb it, because there was actually very little to climb up on this structure. But eventually I bumped into, I think it was I'm pretty sure it was the pressure testing hose. So the hose we'd been using from the ship, as it had moved away in an uncontrolled fashion, it had just been ripped off the back deck, basically. And I think had fallen into the water column, and was lying over the top of the structure. So I had enough purchase and weight in it that I was able to climb to the top. Panicking, by the way, at this, I'm not going to pretend otherwise. It's very, very scared, panicking, breathing hard. People often say, "Oh, it's amazing you were so calm." I was not calm.
No.
I was as scared as I think anybody would be in that situation.
Because if for people, I mean, I don't know if anyone will ever, experience it, but there's literally a structure in the middle of nowhere that you're going to, and I mean that's it. So when you fell off it, when you landed, did you land? Because what I'm thinking too is because I was watching it in the documentary as well, because that was the first thing that came to my head is how lucky you were to walk back to the structure. Because had you fucked off somewhere else, I mean you would have. I mean, it would have been very fucking difficult to find the way back. But was there anything in the back of your mind that kind of remembered how you fell off it to know to get back up, to kind of go there, or was it literally a shot in the dark?
That's a good question. Yeah, I always feel like I'm telling a Shaggy Dog story. I sort of tell the version, but that's a good point. Did I have a sense of it? I probably did. Now you mention it, yeah, I haven't really ever thought about that. But yeah, I maybe got back up to my feet and head back in a direction that I was facing, I suppose. Yeah, maybe that was the difference. You're quite right. Yeah, but yes, it is exactly to describe. It's just a structure in a desert, really.
Basically, it's an underwater desert, isn't it? That's all it is.
Exactly. Next stop the other way would be Aberdeen, probably 90 miles away. So
maybe a couple of stops in between, but that's about
it. Might be the odd rig, yeah. But yeah. In essence, you're I mean, I had a beacon on, so they would have found me, but it would have definitely taken a lot longer, and it would have been very dangerous for them to lower the bell right down beyond the structure, because that's a big anchor, So already when they did rescue me, they brought it very close to the structure to make Dave's job easier. But that's a very dangerous thing to do in with the bell moving up and down in bad weather, which it was. It was 4 or 5 meters of sea up above us. It was pretty marginal whether we'd been diving in that or not. But yeah, very.
Yeah. So yeah, sorry. So I'm cutting you off as per usual.
That's okay.
So you found the hose. Obviously, I'd imagine there'd be a very unhappy pipelines company that's up top that have lost the hose at the same time, and half their gear, and then you use that to.
That would have been their chief concern, definitely. Yeah.
Yeah. Fuck the diamond. We need a hose back.
No, look at the mess we've got to tidy up.
It's fucking chemicals everywhere. And then so that was. So how'd you know to climb up it, basically in pitch black? On a 20. What did you say the structure was? 20 meters, or was it 20 meters high?
It was about 10 meters high. Yeah,
10
meters
meters
high. Yeah, it's just instinct, isn't it? I think you just think up. Diving bell's up, surface is up, help is up. I just thought that's the best thing to do, was to go upwards, really. I'm not sure there was a lot of thought involved. You want to get to a position where I can maybe see the diving bell, I thought. And the truth is that was the seminal moment for me in the whole thing, is when I got to the top, because for some reason I looked up and fully expected to see the diving bell there that lit up, expected to see Dave on his way back to help me out, and it's all going to be okay, sort of thing, like it always is, in our lives. But I looked up and it was just inky black sea, not a speck of light in the sea above me. And I think at that point I realised this has gone from, a scary situation to very quickly into what I realised was going to be a life threatening one. I sort of crawled to the mid. I was very frightened of falling off the structure. Sort of crawled hand over hand, gripping the grating to the mid to what I didn't have no idea where I was, but I thought maybe towards the middle of the structure just to make sure I wasn't going to fall off and just to make finding me that bit easier. And I remember doing the maths. My maths isn't great at the best of times, but I remember thinking, I've probably got 8 or 9 minutes of gas. I've definitely used 4 or 5 getting up here, breathing hard as well. Even if Dave had been right in front of me, I realised that the margin between getting me back into a breathable environment and getting my hat off before I ran out of gas were already going to be very, very slim. But with nobody there at all, I think it dawned on me quite quickly that, or at least I thought, this was probably going to be the end here. Yeah, yeah, that happened quite quickly. I remember thinking, oh,
So you
I'm not getting out of
I
this.
mean, you thought that, did you? Really? I mean, realistically, that's, you're thinking that's it. I mean, that's it. Well,
Yeah,
yeah.
definitely. Yeah, I mean, it was. I mean, it was weird, really, because there was almost 2 phases to it. There was a sort of panic-stricken, frightened phase, and then, as I said, I almost have this moment where I realise that this is probably going to be it. But that was very calming in a weird way. I remember the fear sort of drained out of me. I also realised I was powerless. I had no buoyancy. I couldn't, even if I could see something, I couldn't have swum to it. It was nothing I could do. It really was. I really am just a damsel in distress in all of this. There's nothing I could have done. So I almost assumed the fetal position on the bottom. I couldn't quite suck my thumb, but because the helmet, but that's what it felt like. Just powerless, just craning up in hope, really. But yeah, definitely, my thoughts turned to just the countdown. Really, it seemed to take a lot longer than I thought, but it did seem to last a long time, and it's an unusual. I don't like to harp on about it because obviously I'm absolutely fine, and people get deaths, notional death sentences every day through cancer diagnoses and things like that. So, but it was, yeah, obviously rare to have this opportunity to count down to what I thought was going to be my impending death and to reflect a little bit on what that all meant. So yeah, that's really all I thought about in the last few minutes was the fact that I was on my way out. I craned my neck up a few times, hoping obviously to see something, but it just it didn't seem very credible that I would get back. Yeah.
No, and at this point, obviously, I can't say to you, oh, what 1 minute was this, because that was the last thing on your mind. But and then what happens? Because that's and obviously in the documentary, you kind of you get the ROV comes over and stuff like that. But there's obviously this period in between where you've got into that position, and you're lying there, and then what happens?
Well, yeah, I lay there, really. That is it. And then I spent, I don't know. I mean, if I had to put a guess on it, I would say I reckon there was maybe 5 minutes. I would guess. I mean, I think your sense of time is I couldn't be held accountable for it. I don't think.
Yeah.
I'm sure you lose a proper sense of time. But I do, as I said, I remember taking it longer than I thought. So maybe it did last longer. A lot of our calculations are based on emergency breathing rates and things. So once I calmed down, I think your body almost self-regulated because I couldn't save myself. My breathing slowed right down, I think. And obviously I would be getting very, very, although weirdly, I don't remember being cold, but I would have been hypothermically cold very, very quickly. So that probably just slowed everything down. So maybe it lasted a lot longer than we think. And I'm thinking, getting ready to die, really, and thinking of people at home and all the things you can probably imagine you would in that situation. But the final moments, yeah, we never really know how long that lasted because the ROV, as you say, does come back and finds me, which gives you that sort of harrowing footage that you see in the documentary. But by the time it gets to me, I'm unconscious. There's no doubt about that. I'm twitching, but in a very unnatural fashion. Some people are asking if I'm waving at the camera. Well, I'm definitely not waving.
Yeah, because they do say that in the documentary, don't they? So he's waving like he's there, he's waving, but it's not like it's a controlled wave, is it? It's not as if you're waving someone off or anything like that. Like it almost looks like it is, like you say, it's like nervous twitching. It's not a wave.
No, I think so. We've had a lot of discussion about what that was. I think in terms of actually passing into unconsciousness, I feel I've got a pretty lucid memory right through everything that happened. But the moment of falling into unconsciousness, I don't really remember. A bit like you going to sleep last night, you don't remember that final moment of passing over, if you like. It wasn't unpleasant. and I think that's probably because when I ran out of, I remember the breathing getting harder. So when you nearly run out of you breathed all the gas down in your scuba bottles, it gets a little bit harder to suck the gas down. So you know it's coming. I think I say in the documentary, and I remember thinking, I just hope this doesn't hurt. I remember thinking, I hope my hat doesn't fill with water and I drown. I didn't want to drown. But yeah, the moment of passing, I don't remember. And I think that's probably because my hat filled with carbon dioxide. So when you've got nothing left to breathe, don't get the flow through the hat. So my exhale breath would have filled the hat with carbon dioxide, and that's probably what actually saw me over in the last few minutes, or at least made it hazy. So it wasn't a,
Yeah, yeah.
it was just a falling asleep. But I think what that also did was that would have. I'm saying I think I've heard from people who actually know what they're talking about. That it would have poisoned my blood, very slowly poisoned my blood. So hypercapnic poisoning, basically. So I build up a CO2 in your blood. It's been suggested that twitching was O2 toxicity. So I touched on that a little bit at the beginning, how high levels of oxygen under pressure can cause you to convulse, for example, when pressure. So in fact, the medical diving doctors suggested that's what it was, and they've actually changed the oxygen limits in our emergency breathing rates because of that. But I'm and most people I've spoken to who know what they're talking about have suggested that's just not possible over that length of time. There's no way to have been convulsing. I went people who regulate blood gas in open heart surgery. They're called perfusionists, and so when you stop the heart during open heart surgery, they have to oxygenate it, take the CO2 out, things like that. So they know about that kind of thing, and they say it's almost certainly hypercapnic shock. So that twitching they see quite a lot with people who have hypercapnic poisoning, so build up a CO2 in the blood. They say it's almost certainly that. But anyway, and apparently that's also neuroprotective. Sorry, we're going a bit deep here.
No, it's good. Honestly, if anything, I'm more interested in anything.
Yeah,
It's really good to hear, to be honest.
Well, it is fascinating, yeah, and it's so that apparently is neuroprotective. So we'll come on to me surviving, I'm sure, in a minute. But obviously, I do survive, and no one's been brave enough to suggest otherwise. That I don't think I suffered any brain damage at all. But that might have partially, which seems more incredible to me than surviving, really. But I think that they're suggesting that a lot of that might be to do with the CO2, which apparently can protect the brain. I don't know the mechanics of it, but there you go.
And
anyway,
yeah.
Yeah.
Sorry. No, I was going to say, because the ROV sees you twitching and stuff like that. You have no recollection of seeing the ROV then? None at all?
No. That's the only time frame reference we got. So that gets to me, I think, maybe 15 minutes, shall we say, 15, 16 minutes, I think, after my umbilical has snapped.
Okay.
So we know I know my gas didn't last that long because I am unconscious then. Whether I'd just fallen, unconscious a minute before that and my gas lasted 15, 14 minutes, it's quite possible, not 5 minutes as the documentary makes out. But we'll never know. Maybe it lasted 7, and it just, I have no idea. And it was only a couple of minutes before I fell unconscious, from getting to the top. I just don't know really. But yeah, so when the RV gets to me, I'm unconscious, and at that point the vessel is still out of control. They're still 250 meters away from my position. Dave's umbilical is only 50 meters, so there's nothing they can do, and they're moving. It wasn't their fault. It's just not a system that's designed to be controlled manually in those conditions. It's the DP manual system. They were trying to work it with joysticks. It's really just for nudging the vessel into the quayside when you come in, as you probably know, and
when it's calm.
Yeah, exactly, when it's calm. And the best they could manage was to try and get the bow of the vessel into the weather. It was 35, nearly 40 knots gusting, and 4 or 5 meters of swell. So it was, the boat was giving it all of that, and the best they could do was turn it into the weather. They were not coming back. If they hadn't reset the DP system, they were not coming back to get me. The captain had already said, I won't even risk the diving bell going anywhere near that manifold, because he would have risked the vessel, would have risked the other 2 divers, quite rightly so. Because they're so far away, there's nothing. The ROV could get to me, and it really just sits there. So that footage you see in the documentary, you see, I don't know what, 30 seconds, a minute of it. That goes on for the best part of half an hour. And that twitching you see, so that, we probably won't talk about trauma too much, but I don't really feel I suffered, but a lot of people on the vessel have suffered trauma. They suffered sleepless nights. A lot of people left the diving in. Yeah, because they had to witness it firsthand, in a half an hour of watching, this body, a colleague, and, for 1 or 2, hopefully a friend, basically dying on the seabed. And it's weird. I hear from soldiers and things a lot, and sort of describing the experience of how trauma affects people who witness it more than those who experience it in some ways. We almost had the euphoria of getting through it, but for a lot of people, they just had to watch this, and something that would have had profound professional and personal implications for them all, if I died. So yeah, hard for them. But that footage is very long, and that the thing is that twitching also stops. After a few minutes, the twitching stops, and I lie there completely motionless for what must have felt like an absolute age to them on the boat. So yeah, difficult times for them. I would say more than even more. I'm unconscious in all this. It's pretty easy.
Well, yeah, you're not going to remember any of it, are you? In all honesty, but I can't imagine. Can you remember the ROV pilot's name who was watching you?
I've had told blankly. Yeah, Stephen, he's called. Yeah. He suffered. He I believe, decided never to work with divers again. Yeah,
Really?
Yeah, he was. Yeah, I mean, you can see that. Is he? Oh, he's not. He didn't participate in the documentary, so I get confused between them all. He is in Lifeline. He spoke in Lifeline, which is the sort of 45-minute precursor. It's not dissimilar to Last Breath. It's sort of a lower budget version, but it's really good. He does talk in that, and yeah, I think I might have just got his name wrong. It's a terrible. I'm on a blank. Pretty sure it's Steve. He's a really nice guy. That's really gonna upset me.
It's all right.
I should look. I'll Google it.
We'll edit it out.
But yeah,
We'll edit it out.
yeah. I mean, I don't want to speak on his behalf because he was clearly, but you can tell in the interviews he was very emotionally troubled by it.
No, I can't. No, yeah.
He gets upset, and I believe he never worked with divers again after that. And fair enough. Yeah.
Yeah, no, it's understandable. So, I mean, obviously now you're out of the game, so to speak. You're not going to remember any of it. But from what you've been told after the ROV finds you, what happens next in terms of the boat coming back for you?
Yeah, so they're battling to try and sort the DP system out. In the movie, they rewire it, but that doesn't happen.
They did rewire. Was it just just basically an on and off kind of thing? Was it switch it off and start up again? The good old on and off.
Exactly that. Yeah. So they're as you know, they're mostly Norwegian crew on the Topaz. So they call that the Swedish solution, which I don't think is a compliment. It's I think the Swedes call it the Norwegian solution. But it's basically as we all know, when you don't know what to do, you just turn it off and you turn it on again. And yeah, thankfully. Once it rebooted. I mean, I get asked a lot why didn't they do something earlier? Why didn't they do that earlier? Why did they leave it so long? Which is a fair question, I suppose. But I think that the truth is they had this very limited amount of control on the joysticks, and they were concerned if they cut the power basically and turn everything off and turn it back on again, they'd have nothing. They would come back and it wouldn't reboot, and they would be left without even the very small amount of control they did have. So that's why they delayed, really, which I think is probably fair enough. I don't know. It's all very easy in hindsight, isn't it? As you said, in an emergency, it's this is totally unprecedented situation. No one had really prepared for. That's the truth, Anyway, but they did, and it reset. And that's the only. I think that's the only way they were ever going to get back to me was if for that DP system to reset. Because if it hadn't, it would have just been pretty much impossible to try and hold the vessel stably enough to release Dave to come and get me, really. But the DP system reset. They can then move back over in a controlled fashion over the top of me, and then they then lowered the diving bell down a bit. So we have a sort of cardinal rule that we always make sure we keep that diving bell at least 5 meters above any structure we're working, and we try not to ever put it over a structure, because basically that's a big old anchor itself, or certainly a big conker. In the movie, it hits the structure.
Oh, yeah.
We would never let that. But I don't think. So,
Hollywood,
thankfully, Hollywood, bless them. But fair enough. That didn't happen, obviously. But they did lower it. In a swell, because that was really just to make, because it's moving up and down. That's a dangerous thing to do. So they within reason lowered it just to make Dave's job a bit easier. And I think by the time they're over the top of me and they can release Dave, I think 35 or 36 minutes have passed since the breaking of the umbilical. But then Dave has enough umbilical to get to me. He sort of released. He drops down. First thing he does, he puts a gas hose up. So we have a secondary hose to give buoyancy to our jackets, so we can float a bit occasionally. We're normally on the seabed, but occasionally you have to swim. Much as we hate that, as you probably know. Yeah. Divers are averse to swimming and getting wet generally, actually.
Funny that.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
You get paid the same in the chamber.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, there we go. Yeah, but mine had been severed along with the umbilical, so I couldn't give myself any buoyancy. He took his off his jacket and put it up, which actually I just saw Craig, the supervisor in New York, and he told Dave not to do that because he would need, or to put it on my jacket to give me inflation, but he actually put it up my neck dam, so we have a sort of rubber latex seal around our
Yeah.
neck to hold the gas in, obviously, and keep the water out. But he popped it up there, and they turned it on to try and give me a supply. So that probably cleared my hat out of CO2, gave me a gas supply. Dave says it probably fell out as he was rescuing me, but again, we're talking massively small margins, from what I understand, between brain damage and survival and all the rest of it. And these little things could have definitely saved my life. So yeah, he gave me a bit of a gas supply, cleared my hat out. He was very conscious that my umbilical might snag as he pulled me back. The bit that was left, there were a few meters still hanging off me, if you like. So he made sure that was clear, and then he clips himself onto me. We carry a little lanyard on as divers, just for that very purpose, really. And then he turns and he has to pull him back. But neither of us had any buoyancy. I weighed a bit more then than I do now.
Yeah.
I'm 6'5" nearly. I'm not a small person, and with all that kit and helmet and a real dead weight. And you see the footage a bit in the documentary. I'm hanging around underneath, and that diving bell's going up and down 4 or 5 meters. So every time it goes up, that like makes triples your weight.
Yeah.
Woody in the movie has a very smart idea. He says, you've got to climb when it's coming down, which is, yeah, you wouldn't need telling, but yeah, it is true. That's what Dave did. You sort of hold on as it's going up, and then as it's coming down, you go, and climb up. So, but anyway, Dave, as I said, super, super fit guy. He's the kind of person, he used to do chin-ups he used to hang a couple of baseballs on little chains off the top of the chambers, and he'd do chin-ups with his fingers, that kind of
Okay.
rock climber kind of lightweight physique. But yeah, but quite lightweight, live sort of, yeah. But anyway, exactly where you needed to be. And he says to me that at the very end, he was really struggling to get me onto the little stage underneath the bell, and he said that if he hadn't got me onto that stage with his last effort, he was exhausted. He would have had to. It was basically the point. I was gonna have to drop you back to the seabed and start again, or find a different way, because I think actually Duncan had hung. We have what we call it a Mazdan, but it's a man lift, really, or just a pulley system, which is motor driven in the movie, but it's not in real life.
Yeah.
But that sort of Duncan had dropped that out of the bell to clip me onto it, so he can pull me up into the bell. But there was quite a bit of current at that point, and Dave said he was extremely lucky because it was sort of floating in the water towards him. It could have easily been floating the other way, and he wouldn't be able to. And again, he would have said, if I hadn't been that, I'd have had to let you go. So loads of little things, But at that point, he is able to clip me off, shattered. I mean, I can obviously never thank him enough for that effort. Superhuman, really. And as I touched upon, I think a lot of other people wouldn't have managed. Yeah, never thank him enough for that.
No, I can imagine. Like I said, like you said at the start, I mean, the perfect person, just in general, to work with or to be offshore. I mean, you probably, had it been anyone else, like obviously I don't know enough divers to kind of say that, but I mean, you probably got very lucky in terms of the fact that he was the boy that was coming back to kind of save you.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, and as you say, in every respect, he's also an excellent diver. He really is really good at his job and very professional. But yeah, from that perspective, I can't. It's hard to imagine many other people. I mean, there's loads of great divers out there, there really are, but there are also some that aren't, and some that wouldn't have been fit enough. I tell you that now. Yeah. So yeah.
So I mean, ultimately now he's got you back to the bottom of the bell, and then basically it's like a wee frame, is it? And then he pulls you up and he puts you back in, does he?
Yeah, so basically you've got a little hole in the bottom of the bell. It's only really wide enough for one of us to get in at a time. So Dave sort of feeds me in, and then I'm just hanging, really, and we call it the trunking, really, just the hole in the bottom. But I'm just hanging in there on this hoist, really. I'm completely unconscious. My head's just hanging down. Dave can do no more. He can't get in to help Duncan. So it's really completely over to Duncan at that point. Very, very hard thing to do, to pull someone up into the bell and sit them down on a chair. It's something when you're sat as the bellman, you think in an emergency situation, that'd be so difficult, particularly if you ever had to rescue 2 people. That's the absolute nightmare scenario. But anyway, Duncan takes my helmet off. He's at that point, so he can take my helmet off. And as you can see, I unlike lovely Finn, who's playing me in the movie, I don't have any hair. You know, he's a lovely lush head of curly hair. But Duncan, I think maybe he says that in the documentary. I can't remember. It was in one of them anyway. He describes me as an 8-ball or something like that. You know, but he says I was bright blue. Whether that was due to cyanosis or to hypoxia or just the cold, or probably a combination of all of that, I'd imagine. But yeah, he said he was really struggling to keep my head upright. So my head was just lolling down back into the water. My face kept falling back into the water. And he was trying to clamp my head between his knees. Obviously a very difficult environment to work in, to the point where he almost couldn't do anything. So what he ended up doing is we had a second hoist that he attached. I was attached to my back, and he put the second hoist on my front, just to use the ropes to sort of hold my head in position while he tried to work on me. But the first thing he did, as soon as he'd done that, is he gave me, literally just opened my mouth and gave me 2 breaths, and what I touched on trauma a second ago. We said we didn't really suffer any trauma, but if I'd suffered any trauma in this whole experience, it was in the documentary. We had to recreate that, and it's Duncan and I doing it for real in a bell at the Hyperbaric Centre in Aberdeen, and we had to do it about 20 times in a row. So if there's any trauma in all of this, it was that the kiss of life 20 times off Duncan. It was a very pleasant experience.
Yeah, remaking it. I didn't realize that. So that actual footage, that's remade footage. Was there no footage of that on the day then?
Yeah, that's a good question. No, well, we do film in the bell, you see. So I don't know. Maybe the angle of the camera didn't quite show it. I don't know. Maybe it just yeah. To be honest, I've never seen the. I'm gonna go watch it back. No, I don't think it does show it, because the camera's cut. Also, all the cameras shorted out at one point.
Right.
But they do. I believe they came back online. So when my umbilical broke, it shorted out the comms to the bell. For example, we couldn't. The diver, they couldn't speak to the bell for quite a while. I think the cameras went as well. So they're kind of all black screened as well, which must have been very hard for Craig. But I think they come online. The camera. I'm guessing it didn't have the angle to capture that. I don't know. I'd have to have a look. But yeah, so almost 95% of what you see in the documentary is the real footage. There are definitely there are little scenes we had to recreate. Like all the the handy cam footage, for example. Me documenting my life offshore. I'm not really that kind of tosser. I don't do that.
I didn't think that would. That did seem a bit far fetched. That bit.
That was all.
Really, and some of the reactions you would have got would have been told to do one, Chris. Like,
I'm a bit busy here. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, the boss happens to be there. Oh, hi, Chris. How are you? And that.
They're not going to speak to you like that either, are they?
No, but I think the way, as you know, the way they do the documentaries, they sort of hold back the fact that I survived, really, which I didn't think was going to be credible, but it seems to work pretty well. Apparently, people are definitely surprised when I walk out. And to make that, they were sort of, how are we going to make it? How are we going to get to know who Chris is, to make it more of a story, I guess. So we sort of fabricated some of that footage.
They might be this really lovely guy who goes around and filming on the top deck, and he's happy with everyone, and everyone's his best mate, kind of thing.
Yeah, but that's exactly what it was. All I hated doing it.
Yeah, I can't imagine. It was the easiest thing to do. One question actually before Duncan saves you, should we say, in the bell. In the footage in the documentary, Dave sits underneath the bell on the frame, so to speak. Did he go back into the bell at all, or did he stay there the whole time that they lost DP?
Yeah, he stays out there the whole time. There was no reason for him to come back in the bell yet. Again,
he never went into the bell at all to speak to him when there was no comms or anything like that. He just stayed there.
No. He might have regained comms at some point, but generally in the bellman doesn't have an open line of communication to the divers. Generally speaking, can't speak to them.
Oh, right.
Okay. It's always relayed through dive control. You might be able to patch them in if you had to, but no, certainly on the Topaz we didn't. You couldn't do that, and so everything would have been relayed through. So they would have been speaking to each other through Craig, but there would be no purpose to get in. Really, there wasn't really much to discuss. Really, they were just waiting really to see if they could possibly come back, and Craig was talking him through what we would do or what they would do when they got back and things like that. But no, again in the movie, Simu, who plays Dave, gets back in, gets dry. I don't know if they have a cup of tea, but it's that kind of thing. They have a long chat about what they should do. It's a body recovery now. No, it isn't. It's great. Yeah.
Oh, dude.
So there's all that kind of thing. But no, he stays out in the water the whole time. Yeah.
that's a testament to him as well to stay in there. I mean, because it could be easy for someone to panic and get back in the bell and go, oh my god, like, you know, and have a total panic fit himself. But the fact that he stayed and knew just to stay there, that is that's pretty incredible as well.
Yeah, I mean, it would have been. Yeah, I mean, I don't think he would have thought. No, no one would ever considered coming back in and leaving me in there. I don't think any of us would do that. But yeah, you're right. I mean, he was absolutely calm, and I think it gave him a bit of a chance to collect himself and recover physically as well,
Yeah.
to be able to put the exertion in that he did.
And then so Duncan's got your head between his legs, and he's basically trying to get
No,
you
let
going.
me put it like that. Yeah, yeah.
And he's trying to get you going again.
Yeah, yes, exactly. And it's just literally, apparently, he just puts his gets a seal with his lips and gives two breaths, and apparently I exhaled very very violently. I don't remember coming round at all, but it sort of suggests my esophagus was maybe blocked, and there was probably still gas in my lungs, because I exhaled quite violently apparently. Um, and yeah, for me it was sort of flashing lights. I don't really remember any of that really. Apparently, I was just grunting, not responding really to anything at all. But eventually, after maybe, I don't know, 2, 3, 4 minutes of that sort of slowly coming round his consciousness, apparently, again, I don't remember, I climbed up the ladder myself. Because, as I said, it was very hard to get somebody in, especially somebody of my sort of dimensions. I was able to climb up the ladder, and I sat down in the chair myself, apparently, and started almost to go through the process of taking my equipment off, like nothing had happened really. But yeah, once I'm in, Dave is then able to come back into the diving bell himself and sit down, and they'll close the door, and we can begin the process of coming back to the surface. I was bright blue, very, very cold apparently, and barely responsive. And they sort of started to douse me with hot water. We have hot water we pump into our suits, so they sort of took one of them off and slowly started to try and reheat me on the way back. And that process of coming back to the ship and sort of lock onto the chambers takes 35 minutes maybe on the Topaz. So quite a bit of time to sort of warm me, and during that time I think I'm slowly starting, they're asking me questions, and I'm slowly I don't know. My first memory is of seeing Dave crumpled on the other side of the bell and thinking, what's wrong with him? Why is he so tired?
What's he been up to?
Yeah. What's he? Yeah, exactly. Pull yourself together, Dave. Yeah.
Please no out.
Yeah. I don't remember much of coming back. You can see if you watch all the footage, I think Dave grabs my hand at one point, but there's definitely a point where I reach out and grab their hands and give them a bit of a squeeze, and obviously I must have realised something has happened. Yeah.
And then
funny. Yeah.
And then ultimately you come back around. You're in the bell with them, and then what do you remember? When do you remember being compos mentis, so to speak, again?
Yeah, I think I would say probably my memories start to come back really once we're back in the chamber system. So apparently, when we got back, we locked on. There's about a 3-meter climb down, so they left me on one of the hoists, but I did climb down myself. There's a bit of a gaggle of a whinge of divers, as you might know, is the collective term for divers, especially when you're a supervisor these days. It's a whinge of divers, the collective noun, waiting for me down in the wet pot, and they stripped all my kit off, all my clothes off, and pretty much lay me naked on the floor and showered me down with a hot shower, which, thank goodness, that didn't make it into the documentary. Nobody wants to see that. And then they sort of transferred me through to another chamber and wrapped me in towels and blankets and put a tea cozy on my head, which they reckon is what saved me. Warm tea cozy. That's maybe when my memories start to come back, I would say, when I'm in the bunk there and people are coming through to talk to me slowly, and then they're pretty much having to tell me what's happened. And yeah, it was weird. I remember being a bit naive and blasé about it at the time, and I was like, oh right, okay, when are we going back diving? Not really understanding, I don't think, the magnitude, I guess, of what had just happened really. Yeah.
It's mental, because obviously in the documentary you go into the bunk and then you come back up with the medic diver, and I kind of mind if I heard it in the documentary. I think it is, but it's quicker to come back from the moon than it is to come back from sat diving, well, from being decompressed. I'm sorry for being down at sat.
Yeah, we love a good space analogy. It makes us
Yeah.
sound sexy, you know? Yeah, yeah, yeah. I think that the difference between us and astronauts is you have to be able to tie your shoelaces to be an astronaut. It's not really the case for being divers, you know?
Otherwise, no, the divers are fondly known across the industry as bubble heats.
Yes, there's the yeah, exactly.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah. They're not always popular wherever they go. Yeah, yeah.
So
Um, yeah, but yes, the moment. Sorry, I feel totally forgotten your question.
no, no. So obviously
Oh,
you're in the chamber with the dive medic. How long did it take you to kind of bring you back?
yeah. Sorry. Yeah, your question. Yeah, but it's right. Yeah, it's true. I mean, I think it takes 3 days to come back from the moon. But we talked a little bit at the beginning about how it works, and now those. It takes 4 days to. We were at 91 meters, so that 4 days to decompress basically, and that can't be circumnavigated. If your mother dies, if your appendix bursts, it doesn't matter. You still have to go through those 4 days. So yeah, we had that time, which was good in some ways. I think we talked it to death for 4 days, and that was probably quite a cathartic process that we had to recover. I mean, within a couple of hours, I was very sleepy. They wouldn't let me go to sleep, and I was just shattered, I think, physically. But ultimately fine. And once they did let me go to sleep and I woke up, I was back to normal, up and walking around like nothing had happened. Really, I had a bit of bruising inside my legs. That was about it, really. But yeah, so we still had to go through 4 days, and I think by the time that the door popped, as we call it, on the last day, and we came out, it was almost behind us. Then we'd almost recovered at that stage. It was
It's
yeah.
quite an emotional scene though in the documentary, isn't it? That bit of you coming back around.
Yeah. Okay. So yes, so that's with Stu, who's a lovely guy. We're all sort of have to have a level of training. We're all what we call
Yeah.
diver medic technicians, which is just enough because we have to be self-sufficient in there to some extent. But really, what it is just enough knowledge to make you dangerous. You think you're a doctor, but you definitely aren't.
No.
In fact, they decided I needed an IV line, and they tried to put an IV line in me at some point, couldn't manage, and decided, he doesn't really need one.
Try someone
So
else.
that tells the whole story, Yeah, yeah. No, so that scene was Stu. So spoiler, I guess, but yeah, I don't have any recollection of that at all. That conversation with Stu, and as I said, almost everything in the documentary is the real thing, but we don't record the footage in the chambers. We are filmed in the chambers all the time. I mean, they need to film us in the shower. Apparently, I don't know. I don't really know why, but they apparently for our own safety. Yeah, the actual footage is is a recreation. So Stu is been over me. So we had to recreate that, is what I was saying, wasn't it?
Yeah.
But I remember at the time of the recreation, I was laughing and joking about it, saying, "This is, what's all this about? This is a little bit silly." And we went through it a few times, and I have to hold his hand and stuff like that. Okay, yeah. So that is a recreation, and I was sort of when we did it, I because I didn't remember it happening, I was laughing and joking my way through it a little bit, and I taking a piss, I suppose, out of Stu a bit. Um, and then I watched the documentary, a year later, maybe when it came out, along with everybody else. And I got to watch Stu being interviewed, and you realise how emotional he gets, and how it meant something to him. So I felt quite bad for having sort of laughed my way through that bit because, yeah, we touched upon it earlier on. It's incredible how much it's affected other people, and people had to witness and suffer their way through it. To see this big, sturdy lad from Inverness get very emotional about things like that. So yeah, but yeah, I think I say something like dying's okay or something like that. Yeah, which again they use all of that in the movie. Yeah,
So you actually said that in real life, though. You said dying's okay.
apparently, yeah. I don't remember. I don't have memory, but Stu certainly would have no reason to lie, and yeah, I trust that his portrayal of it is accurate. But yeah, apparently. I sort of said it's okay, it's not that bad, it's as I was saying to you on, like it's like falling asleep really at the time, and and I often say that if that is how my time comes eventually, then I can live with that.
Yeah, you've done it once, you'll be all right the next time.
Yeah, exactly.
So right, and then obviously the door pops and then what? It's almost just like you crack on, so to speak. Like you get out. Obviously, they do the usual on you, but did you sail? I take it you sailed back into Aberdeen, obviously, and the usual. What you have to do to kind of get everything back up and running. Severed umbilical and that. But I mean, the fact of the matter is people are going to listen to this and go, "Fucking hell, like that is traumatic." But you were back in the water 3 weeks later.
Yeah. Well, we were shut down by the HSE first of all. Nobody went back to work for 3 weeks, and yeah, they gave us the option to go back. I don't think they meant me initially, but I think when I sort of said I was happy to it's probably good for them, really. They were probably quite keen for me to get back in the water and get going, mostly so I wouldn't sue, I would have thought. But it was
There is a,
yes, forever.
I'm actually going to ask that. There's a rumor, as there is
Yeah,
offshore, and
yeah,
I imagine you've heard it. There was a rumor that they either guaranteed you longevity of work,
yeah,
or you so to speak, you put a claim against them. How
yeah.
true is that rumor?
Entirely false. Yeah,
Yeah. Okay.
I can tell you the compensation. I'll tell you the compensation I got for this whole affair, which is that first time I did any sort of public speaking was at offshore Europe, which wasn't that long after the accident, and I did a speech there with Howard Woodcock, who was the chief executive of Bibby. He's a really really nice guy. I went up to the boardroom at Bibby in West Hill, and we sort of did a bit of a run through of what we were going to say. And at the end of it, he goes, "Right, it's about time we did something for Chris," And I was like, "Oh, okay, right. Here come the keys to the Range Rover,"
Yeah. Yeah.
for
Yeah.
just for being a good boy and staying quiet. And he sort of walked me through the offices and went back to his PA and sort of said, "Oh, yeah, we need to do something for Chris. Have we got any t-shirts?" so, yeah, if you want to lay that one to bed, that'd be great. No, that was the extent
Oh,
of conversation with a t-shirt and a small bibby bag, I think. Yeah.
and a trip to the Bond.
Uh, and it's not even a trip to the Bond, yeah. And no, they didn't guarantee me any more work. Maybe, you could argue that maybe it would be in the
Felt
best
sorry
interest
for you.
to keep me going a bit. But yeah, I don't know. I like to think I've kept going on my own merits, but maybe not. Maybe they've just quietly been keeping me there to keep me quiet. I think after 7 years, I can't sue anyway. Apparently, a friend told me.
And that is it. Well, the Bibby are no more anymore anyway, are they? I mean, and then
Yeah, exactly.
it was forever after it. I mean, it's now it's Biscala's now. So I mean, I'd imagine your situation is well down the pecking order in terms of what they get up to now. I mean, it's a monstrous
Yeah.
company, isn't it? Really. So
It is enormous, yeah. Yeah, I think that ship has firmly sailed. But yeah, the joking aside, the truth was I was absolutely fine. There was
yeah,
nothing wrong with me. I didn't feel psychologically damaged. I felt more confident in a weird way about what we do in terms of the fact that we were able to extricate ourselves. So yeah, there was no bravery in going back. It was just my concerns were really that I was worried I was going to lose my job, and that they wouldn't let me go back. And I've spent basically all my career to that point, trying to get to that point, and to have to throw it all away. So I was just delighted to get the opportunity to go back and get going again. And also, I think you feel disassociated from what happened, or I do. I watch the footage back, and I think, oh, that's somebody else. Almost, is he going to make it, kind of thing.
yeah.
Yeah, you feel like a third party, really. So going back was actually quite easy, really. We went back. We were pretty much, I think, the first back in the water, and the same three. We went back with Dave and Duncan, or I went back with Dave and Duncan, and sort of picked up where we left off 3 weeks later. And it, as it always is, everyone took the piss the whole time, and do you need a hand getting back? And they were making me lie on the seabed, testing transponders face down. It was all very cruel, really. But yeah. But yeah, that's how you get through these things. But truthfully, is when we got back working again, you're concentrating on what you're doing, and it was all forgotten quite quickly, really. So yeah, it was fine. Just like getting back on a bike, I think it was one of those. Maybe if we hadn't done it straight away, we maybe never would have done. I don't know, but yeah, ultimately it was all absolutely fine, and I never really felt like I suffered ever since. And I carried on for another 10 or 11 years doing it.
So do you think that was the best thing you ever did? Straight back in the water.
Well, the best thing would have been to sue and retire to the Bahamas. But I was young, I was naive, I didn't have any kids, if only I'd known better. Some people actually get generally angry with me that I didn't sue, and why would you still be here? But we're all different, aren't we? My conscience couldn't have taken the lie, I suppose, because it would have been a lie to try and get any kind of conversation. So yes, for me it was. Yeah, I'm delighted. I'm really, when I sort of stopped diving about 3 years ago, I felt a sense of relief, really, but I always enjoyed it. And I got tired of living in the chambers, really, more than anything. But as a career, it's always been a real positive in my life, yeah.
And obviously now it's a lot easier in hindsight, as we spoke about earlier. Do you think there could have been anything done differently to prevent what ultimately happened?
Yeah, I mean, it's a good question. Ultimately, we had to revisit the fact that we had a single point failure. Really, that the crux of it was that, really. That computer system should not have failed. The backup basically had a shared power supply, and they had an electrical fault in that. Really, it was something that a problem that had existed since the point of installation. So that had to be addressed. That the software was put in place to try and prevent anything like that happening again as well, because it's a system that exists on boats all over the world, obviously, not just diving boats. So yeah, from the heart of it. But after that, we almost look at it as a success story. Really, we have addressed umbilical management has to be addressed at some point. But we as I said, I don't know that we could have done much that differently. There's a good argument which I've heard, which is that we shouldn't both have been in the structure at the same time. And a lot of the most of the time these days, if we have two divers in, we'll keep one diver outside to tend an umbilical. But even in that situation, I don't know whether that would have made much difference, because the problem didn't come with us getting out of the structure. The problem came with us just getting back to the bell. So that probably would, potentially would still have happened. I don't know. Anyway, we're more mindful of it, definitely. We've made little changes, like we now use rebreathers on our back instead of just scuba tanks, if you like. So that would give you more time. So in that situation, I would have had 40 minutes of gas rather than none. But there's also an argument that the fact that I stopped breathing and cooled right down, that saved me. The fact that I went into stasis almost. If I'd been breathing, there's a good chance I'd have died of, hypothermia or something. It's just, yeah, it's a hard call. So we learned little lessons, lots of little things we learned, which I won't bore you with, sort of practical things. But what we really realized culturally, I think, was that we shouldn't have learned those things on the night. We do diver rescue drills all the time, but it was evident that there wasn't enough realism in those. People were tired. A diver, a bell run, whoever's playing the dead body kicks his legs and helps and things like that. So you don't really learn the little intricacies of things that could go wrong in a rescue. So just as a general rule, I think we've tried to understand that drills and procedures and things like that need to be conducted in as a realistic fashion as possible, and that they need to be an evolving procedure. Everyone needs to give feedback, and we need to be trying to learn lessons all the time, not just going through the motion. So a bit of a cultural shift there. But ultimately, as I said, it was in a weird way, it was a success story, apart from the sort of single point failure, if you like. Everything else from a diving perspective anyway. And certainly, let's take me out of the equation, whatever you think of that. Certainly from everyone else's point of view, it was remarkably efficient rescue and recovery of what was basically an impossible situation. So, in some ways it was celebrated as much as learned from. But yeah, it's also complacency sets in, doesn't it? Some of the things we perhaps learn get forgotten, and good idea to go and watch a documentary every now and again to remind yourself.
Yeah, no, that's exactly what I watched a couple of weeks ago after you agreed to come on. Do they know why you survived? Yeah, because in the documentary, which is 6 years ago, they still didn't really know. Is there been any more investigating into it to find out how you survived?
There's a few research projects. I get contacted by professors in universities and stuff like that all over the world, but nothing, nothing concrete is the answer. I've spoken at the British Medical Society, of hyperbaric conferences, this perfusionist conferences, people who really know about blood gas and this kind of thing, and in a hospital setting particularly. So there's definitely theories, and I think I'd always assumed it was the cold. You hear of kids falling through ice and surviving for improbably long periods of time and stuff like that. And I definitely think that helped. But what I have learned is had I sort of gone to the point of stasis with the cold, where your body does go into hibernation at about, I think it's about 31, 32 degrees Celsius, your body goes into your core temperature, you go into stasis really. But had it been that cold, there's no way Duncan would have resuscitated me that quickly. It would have been a much slower, protracted process to bring me back to consciousness. So I think that probably helped. It definitely extrapolated the time that I had, but I'm almost certain it was the gas. Yeah, the gas that we breathe, tissue saturated with oxygen. With that, as I said, we were breathing 6% that night, 10% oxygen in my bailout, which is well over 5 times as much as we're breathing now. I guess it just saturated the tissues with oxygen and gave the building blocks of life just about enough to survive. I think there was maybe also a final inhalation of gas. So I had a gas full of high oxygen content, if you like, gas, and my breathing rate had come to almost zero, and I'm cold, and all these things mean there was just enough there. But I think, yeah, no is the answer. These are theories. We'll never really know, I don't think. What strikes me is when you do go and talk to medical professionals, is you think they're going to be like, we see this kind of thing all the time. Yes, that's very explainable, and it's definitely not. They very much seem almost as bewildered. Particularly that I didn't suffer any brain damage. Yeah,
I think that's the most incredible thing, is that you didn't suffer any brain damage, because ultimately, if you obviously the key thing is that you came out and you just walked off as if nothing happened. Like, just listen to your story. I mean, it is incredible. I've actually been fascinated by yours since I went on the Topaz, nearly 10 years ago. But I mean, yeah, I'm still in a bit of, I'm trying to get over how the fact that you're still able to walk and talk and then you went back in the water. That's pretty impressive. Like, it is a testament to yourself. I would guess your resilience as well, so to speak. The fact that I mean, don't get me wrong, it probably didn't happen that you don't remember majority of it, so it's not exactly going to impact you directly. But the fact that you got out of the bin, you did your 3 weeks off while HSE were investigating, and then it was almost a case of, yeah, I'm going back again. It does show an awful lot of resilience, like to kind of put aside to what happened and just get straight back in the water. With on the back of that, the fact that you're going to get the piss taken out of you for a good while would be one
Yeah,
of the
that's
key.
now that you got to the nub of it now. Yeah,
Yeah,
exactly.
yeah. Because let's be honest, like, divers are, a diver from a mile away, and
Yeah.
I've worked with them a few times. You always know the divers on board. They're loud and they're very, very egotistical, and I can imagine there would have been some amount of abuse.
Yeah, the one place I get no sympathy is absolutely at work, and never
Yeah,
have done, and that's fine. That's good. That's a healthy
that's what you want.
career. But yeah, yeah, I think so. Yeah, it's better that way, isn't it? Yeah, yeah. You need taking down a peg or two every now and again. I certainly do. Yeah.
Yeah. So, I mean, Chris Lemons now, what is he up to? I mean, obviously you've got a movie out with, Woody Harrelson, Finn Cole, and I can't mind the other actor, but I know there's quite a few big ones in there. You've got the documentary. You're a dive super for a wee while. I mean, what are you doing outside of that?
Yeah, so I sort of transitioned to supervising about 3 years ago, which I really enjoy. Yeah, I've had to supervise Duncan, which was a bit of a weird experience, but
Wow.
yeah. But yeah, no, in fact, I was on the Topaz exactly to the minute 10 years after the accident. It was me sending the starboard bell down as a supervisor, which was kind of strange as well.
I can
But that's
imagine.
been great. Yeah, yeah. And yeah, I mean, you say, I've got a movie out. It's nothing to do with me really. I just, it just sort of features us, I suppose. But yeah, it's been, as you
About
can
you.
imagine, a very surreal experience. And yeah, I talk about it more and more. Really, I do quite a bit of public speaking these days, and I'm taking a bit of a sort of sabbatical this year with a movie coming out to do a bit more of that and spread the story, and outside of our industry as well, because it's not just a story, but a world of work that people don't know very much about, as we talked about. So I tend to go out to all sorts of companies all around the world these days and talk about the lessons we learned. Not particularly my resilience, because I'm not sure about that, but certainly the resilience of everyone involved and the teamwork and the organizational behavior, procedures, things like that, all of which sort of subsequently led to me still being there, because really it's just a tall story really, but it's sort of a story that engages people and holds people's attention and serves as a springboard to discussion around all sorts of health and safety subjects, but also sort of broader subjects from a business perspective, I suppose. So I try and translate some of the lessons we learned and travel the world a bit and see some nice places, which is great. Yeah, but yeah, the film experience has been weird. As I say, we're just back from New York to partying to the early hours with Woody Harrelson. You didn't you fuck up once, that's what
Your whole life open it.
Yeah, I hate that line. That line's in the documentary. That's a recreation as well. Nobody said to me, "Don't fuck up again," because that always
Oh,
implies
did
I
they make
fucked
that
up the
up?
first. Yeah, we recreated that. Yeah,
Oh,
but that
okay.
didn't even happen. Yeah, that was. But yeah, I hated it when I first saw it. I thought, oh, that implies I messed up the first time. But uh,
You
and then
get two shots.
everybody always laughs. So what can you do?
Exactly. I always say the first one's a mistake, the second one's a fuck up.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Thanks.
So
That's
as
good.
long as you
Yeah.
don't go down and do it again, you would have been all right.
All right. All right. Well, I've yeah dodged that bullet.
Yeah.
That's good. Yeah.
How do you think this has all changed you as a person? Do you think it changed you as an individual?
Yeah, I'd be a lie to say. I always say that it hasn't. I had never had an epiphany. You don't suddenly dramatically move on and think, I'm going to live every day to its full and things like that. Life has a habit of normalizing things and taking over quite quickly. The humdrum of day to day life. Going to buy a pint of milk or taking the bins out and things like that. That takes over. But I think it'd be a lie to say it hasn't changed me. In a way, from a diving perspective and a working perspective, as I said, I felt more confident in many ways. It's been a positive experience in my life. Really, it's opened lots of doors and things like that. I think probably the only real change in me as a person is I maybe have a more acute awareness of death. I would say I think about death a little bit more, about the fragility of life and how our time on Earth is very short, I suppose. But I'm sure we all think about that anyway to some extent. Maybe I've just got a slightly more closer relationship with that, I suppose. And I like to think I'm someone who tries to live every day to its best anyway. And but yeah,
Do you reflect on it much?
when the kids are screaming, forget that, don't you?
That's when it all changes now.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Do you reflect on it much? Because ultimately, like you're going through the story now, and you can remember quite large portions of it. And now, I mean, it's 13 years ago it was. I think it was something like that. But do you reflect on it much?
Yeah, I mean, I don't have any choice but to reflect on it really, because it follows me around for every single day of my life.
Like when you're on your own, so to speak, not
Yeah.
if it's forced on you.
Yeah, very rarely. Yeah, at work sometimes. Now, as a supervisor, more I think about it a lot more, and think about how horrendous it must have been for Craig in that position. How would I deal with that situation? Things like that. It's usually when I hear other people speaking about it, I have a bit of a moment. I was with strangely Stu, the medic. I was working out in Trinidad recently, and he was there. I had him in my team as well, supervising him, and then we went for a few beers afterwards in Trinidad, and he got very emotional that night as well. And it's usually bits like that when I've realised what a massive deal it was, because it often doesn't feel like that to me. It just felt like a little incident that happened, and it's really when you speak to other people that I pause for thought and reflect a little bit more on. Yeah, how lucky I was, really, I suppose. Yeah, it takes time, and you grow older and wiser. And as you say, it's 15 years ago, I think it is now, that it happened. And no, 12. You're right, sorry. Yeah, and yeah, you grow a bit more mature, and I've got kids and things like that. And we talked about going back to work, and would I do that now? I don't know. I suspect not. You feel the weight of responsibility of the people around you a bit more, and on the people around you a bit more. So yeah, I do. I definitely pause for thought more now. And the release of the documentary was a big one, because it's only really in watching that you sort of, I got a bit of perspective on it and what it meant to everybody else, and that sort of forced me to think a little bit more about it. So yes, I do think about it sometimes. Yeah.
And this is a question I ask all the guys and girls that be coming on here. But if you had your time again and you knew what you did now, would you have gone down the same path?
To work offshore as a diver, you mean?
Yeah.
Oh, that's a good question.
Based on what you know about the whole offshore industry and everything now, do you know what I mean? Do
you know what? I've loved working offshore. I have. It's absolutely changed my life. It changed my life financially. It changed my life in terms of giving me confidence. And I'm not talking about diving particularly, just working offshore. It's been a really good lifestyle. I've traveled the world doing it. Lots of good nights out in lots of good places, lots of stories and experiences. So yeah, I mean, if I'd had my time again, I would have worked harder at school, and I'd like to have been a journalist or a doctor or something. But in the absence of that, I don't regret going offshore, and it's been a massively positive experience for me. That, and I'm not clever enough to be a doctor. But there is that. So yeah, would I encourage? I don't know. The question I often get asked is, would you encourage your daughters to go and be a diver? I'm not sure I would. But
would you encourage them to go offshore?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, I don't see why not. It's a good way of life, and it's the luxury of the time off, the camaraderie, all those kind of things. Yeah, it's great. I mean, I think, could you ever go and work in an office, Chris? I suppose is the do 9 to 5. I would struggle with that. So, it tells you its own story, I suppose. Yeah, it's an exciting, interesting, difficult, sometimes hard. It's not all good, is it? There's you miss a lot of things. I've missed a lot of Christmases and birthdays and weddings and close friends' weddings and stuff like that you'll never get those times back, I suppose. But every job has its downsides, doesn't it? And I think on the balance of things, working offshore is a bit of a privilege, really. I think most people who work out there should count themselves very lucky. A lot of people moan about it, but I think you're kind of privileged in a way. You're often lucky to get that position in the first place. It's not always on merit.
No.
And people should be conscious of that sometimes. That there are a lot of people who rip your arm off to take your job and your pay, sort of thing. So yeah, no, I don't regret it. And I would, if you get the opportunity, grab it. It's at least to try it. It might not be for you, but it's a great way of life in many ways.
No, that's perfect, Chris. Thank you so much for coming on. I mean, like I say, your story's legendary within the, especially in the UK sector, the diving. Just from my experiences around it. But I really appreciate you coming on. Thanks so much for that.
No, it's a pleasure. It's always nice to talk to nice people, Joe, and somebody with some intelligent questions always helps as well. So thanks to you. It's
That's
been a
quite
pleasure.
flattering, actually. I'm gonna take that one. I'll definitely keep that
Good.
one in the record.
Put it in the ad. Yeah.
Yeah, that'll definitely be flat. Thanks so much for that, Chris.
You're welcome, Joe.
So, there you have it. Pretty impressive man. You know, very normal man, very humble person as well, which I thought was great, even considering, you know, all the kind of publicity around him, so to speak. He was one of the first people that when I put messages out to individuals that I, you know, wanted to come on, he was pretty much the first to get back to me. And I remember when he said yeah, he'd be more than happy to do it, it was almost like a fanboy moment, just because I'd seen his documentary back in 2019, and then I watched it a couple of weeks, you know, before he came on, and now obviously he's over, you know, jet set and go getting with celebs. But an impressive man, and you know, really good lad to speak to. I really enjoyed it speaking to him. I took an awful lot from it. I was straight on the phone to my missus after saying I was pretty you know, amazed by it all, and it was unbelievable, and I enjoyed every minute of it. And I think if anything I've taken from it is the normality of the way he is after suffering from, well, as you know, he doesn't really, I guess, you know, he remembers very limited factors of it, but the ability to just get up and go again, I think it really reflects not just on you as an individual, or, you know, going to your job, but just reflecting on life and being able just to get up and go again. I mean, 3 weeks back in the water, that was unbelievable. And it puts all into perspective just how dangerous the job is. You know, you're heavily reliant on other individuals, and yeah, it's a fascinating podcast, that one. I think it was more me listening to it than if anyone else is, but I really took a lot from it, and I hope you guys did too, and I hope you enjoyed it. And next time we'll have someone else on. Probably not quite the same story, but I'm sure it'll be a different one. But until then, we go again. Thank you very much for listening.